We're live. All that commotion. How is everybody doing on this weekend? This is a weekend, right? Let me see. Yeah, Sunday. So this Sunday on this weekend morning, I just got back from a run. Today I want to talk about this. If you take a look at the thumbnail is this really kind of cool, and I'd never seen this before, and I'm surprised. I mean, I've been hanging out with Mark Sanchez and John Mahovitz from ACCUFAB for decades now, it seems like, and I've never come across this. They've never shown this to me before. And when we were doing the testing on the Kenny Bell supercharger, if I can get that thing kind of hang back on there. We were running the Kenny Bell supercharger testing. We had a stock 5-liter on there with a factory HO upper and lower intake manifold. He's like, you know what? I got this upper manifold that we should probably throw on there and see what it does. Let's check it out and find out what it does. I'm like, okay, cool. What are you talking about? Is there a 5-liter upper that I haven't seen before that I already haven't tested? And the answer to that, let's see. The answer to that would be yes, there was. And it was this one. And it's a cool, like, thin section that replaces the long runner HO upper intake manifold. So right off the bat, short runners, but the reality is there are no runners in here. I mean, they're just big oval openings. The whole thing is basically the same dimension, and it's designed to fit big oval throttle bodies that I'm sure John made. And it has 2 of them, one for each, basically 4-cylinder sections of it. Because if you look at an HO upper or the lower intake manifold, it has the EGR hole in the middle, but the 4 other individual runners are separated. And so these oval openings, go. I'm definitely gonna have to fix that light. Each oval feeds basically 4 cylinders, so it works pretty well. In terms of, if you want to talk about, although I don't know why you would be very concerned about it, if you wanted to talk about, airflow distribution or something, you could, I guess you could make a case for that, although I don't, it really wouldn't be that critical, because the airflow distribution just from the manifold itself would be a little bit more suspect here. I'm trying to get something going here. Get a little bit more light on the subject. But it's cool nonetheless because it's unique, and I like testing these. It kind of reminds me of it would give you an idea in terms of the change in power, comparable to like these box intakes that we used to put on here. So whatever lower you use, they made them for the factory HO upper or lower manifold. They made them for the GT40 stuff, and probably others too, probably like the Celine or truck manifold. Maybe, I don't know if anybody did them for the Holley Systemax, but it might be comparable. But at any rate, they were basically just short runner versions to replace the long runner HO upper. And this is kind of like that, except it's different because there are no individual runners in there. So the runner length that you're using is basically the runner length on the lower. On all of these box intake manifolds, 2 things would change compared to this thing. A couple of things would change. One, you don't have anywhere near the throttle opening area. So from an airflow standpoint, you'd have a great deal more airflow with this. But as we see with a lot of these things, particularly when the motor's not using all of the available airflow anyway, the fact that you could put a 200 millimeter throttle body on there, it's not going to make any difference. It's not going to change it at all. It doesn't change where the motor makes power. It doesn't do any of that. What it does is the motor just uses whatever small portion of the airflow, of the extra airflow that would be there. It just uses a small portion of that. It doesn't use all of it. So this would offer more airflow than some sort of box that we would put on there, particularly if we use a stock size throttle body. But even up to a 75, which would have been common, or even some of them were set up maybe to accept a 90 millimeter throttle body, and that would be more than enough because this is a sub 300 horsepower motor, so it doesn't need anything anywhere near that size. But these would offer more airflow. But also the box manifolds have a little bit of runner length and usually have some kind of entry going into these. Now, these do have a radius entry on them. Obviously, John knows a thing or two about airflow. And so it did have a radius entry going into each one of these oval blades. So it had that. But at least those had some other short section of runner into the manifold. The other thing that they would have in these upper manifolds versus this big open thing is there's no common plenum. So this would act more like an IR in terms of the Helmholtz resonance frequency. So their Helmholtz resonance frequency is infinite because it's basically all. And I'm sweating here too because I just got back from a run. But the resonance frequency would be infinite because there's no common plenum there's no resonance frequency for that. So it would be different than that. So we have some differences. You know, no runners, basically, lots of airflow, lots of infinite plenum volume. So it would all be kind of different, but it's cool nonetheless. And so we did run this thing on the motor, and we ran it when it was in, I think, stock trim, and we'll take a look at that and see. I think the motor was kind of stock, and then our intention was after we had some airflow research enforcer heads to put on this thing. So after we put on the airflow research enforcer heads and the camshaft, which we had a couple of different camshafts to try, the idea was to try this thing again and then see if, you know, just see what the difference in the power gains was, because naturally we did get a gain in power, which is, you know, not terribly surprising because it's pretty easy to do better than the stock one. Let's see here. Because the stock HO upper intake manifold is not great. The stock lower intake manifold is not great. And then the stock, let's see, Kenny Bell. And so even if you had the point is, even if you had a good upper, having a stock lower on there and stock heads and stock camshaft is going to kind of restrict what's going on there. Okay, so we have this. So we had rockers on it. So it was basically a stock 5.0, had headers, and had full accessories because we needed those because we were going to be running the Kenny Bell supercharger on there. We put some roller rockers on there. Let's see, which ones did we put on there? We had the Crane, like Cobra 1.7 rockers, factory bolt down deals, which we had a few issues with. And we'll talk about that in the video because of the heads that we were using, unfortunately, had varied installed heights for the valves, and so it was not a good situation. But at any rate, we did see a change in power naturally and not surprisingly. In fact, this could be our poll before we go over all the things, because I'm going to do a full video on this. With the dual throttle body So we're trying a little curveball here. So with this dual throttle body upper intake manifold, if we replace the factory HO upper with this, would the dual throttle body upper make more peak torque than the stock HO upper? So with this, I guess, shorter runner, even though there are no runners in it, would it make more peak torque than the long runner stock HO upper? Let's see here. Okay. And we're off and running. And I know people are going to say, well, you need to run this under boost. Yeah, we can kind of guess what that does, because it's probably going to do the same thing. For me, these kinds of things, I kind of have an idea what's going to happen when we run this, that doesn't stop me from wanting to run it. In fact, it makes me want to run it more. I understand what runner length does and what these different design things do. And so we have a pretty good idea. It still makes me want to run it. So I have the actual information, primarily of where crossover things happen and how much things fall off. Does this thing want to make power at a higher engine speed? And if so, where, where would we get to a point where some other thing is the limitation, like I talked about on the stock lower intake manifold? Is this an airflow thing? Is our camshaft, or in this case also the cylinder heads, are those things holding it back? All of those things I want to know. That's why I test this, even though like I said, I have a fairly good idea, having run lots of 5-liter Mustang stuff and lots of different combinations. We have a pretty good idea, but I love the dyno testing, and I love finding out what works and what doesn't work. And even more than that, from a specific standpoint, exactly where does it do what it does? Like, okay, this cam is going to add 10 horsepower. That's great. But what happens at 2,700? What happens at the peak torque? What happens when we team it with something? The more information that you get, the more information that you get. And then also, when you get that information, if you run more combinations, you can then compare them to many, many other things. And so this is another thing. I'd never tested this before. So if right away, it's kind of cool to be finding something from a 5-liter Mustang that hasn't been tested. And it's always cool to be working with Mark and John, because if you're working on a 5-liter Mustang, which obviously I've done more than my fair share of, but those guys have too, a lot, probably more than I have. And so having guys that understand the motor and what goes wrong with it and stuff, and having extra people there to help is always good. Having guys that can just tear into it, and you don't have to worry about them overseeing them changing rockers and stuff. In fact, probably be the other way around. They would be overseeing me doing my stuff, make sure I'm doing it correctly. But it was cool to do that. Most of the time I'm there, by myself doing that stuff, but it's cool to have other guys in there working, and not just other guys, but those other guys. It's kind of cool, kind of a cool deal. Let's see what you guys got going on this morning. Sunday morning. Oh, Shadow Ops, man. I'm sorry to hear that. Oh, short-term memory. Yeah, that's not good. Forward intake manifold upper. Yep. Get an LS cam ground, but with 1843657 firing order, a 106 LSA, like a 220 something, 240 something, because these LSs don't sound anything like a small block. Oh, so you just want to do it to change the sound quality? I've gotta walk the goofball, your puppy. The Edelbrock Performer 4-barrel intake outflow, the Explorer intake manifold. It's not a matter of flow rate. It's a matter of power production. So do you want to know if it makes more power than an Explorer? The answer, a dual plane carbureted intake manifold would make more power than an Explorer does. Ben, that's a tough one. I'm assuming you're responding to the question, the poll question. That's a tough one. I think the extra airflow would outdo the long runners. Good question. Very interesting to know the results. Is it possible for me to reset the record for the world's fastest Crown Vic with a 4.6, or do I have to go with an LS? What is the current record, and what are you trying to do here? Modesto has the American Graffiti Car Show last day. Sonoma has NASCAR. Good weekend for California folks. Oh yeah, lots going on. When I was driving home last night, I went to look for some snakes last night. I didn't find any. Lots of field mice and jackrabbits and stuff. But when I was driving home, today was graduation day, and so I noticed that they had like a car show in one of the local parking lots, which was kind of cool. I don't know. I'm not 100% certain that it was a car show. It could well have just been you know, all of the graduating kids getting together, which is also awesome. I'll put my email down here in case anybody wants to email me for cams or airflow research heads or things like that. So shout out to Airflow Research and to Brian Tooley for helping with the channel. Richard, have you taught us anything? Providing we're paying attention. That's not always the case. The shorter runner, yep. You think the shorter runner, but does the shorter runner make more peak torque? That's the question there. That's the curveball there. My F-150 with a 302 had a dual throttle body upper. Yeah, the truck intake manifold. And it was biased towards torque instead of horsepower. I think it'll make more torque at lower RPM. The interesting thing is, I think, if my memory serves me correct, I haven't done enough testing on the truck intake manifold, but I think that the truck manifold outflows the factory HO Mustang manifold. And so it flows more, but a lot of guys get caught up in the flow thing, and this is not about flow. At least not in terms of runner length. Like I said, the lower manifold is going to dictate the flow anyways. The upper throttle body, at least this dual throttle body thing, flows way more than the rest of the motor does. So it's not a flow thing that where it needed a whole bunch more flow. But that truck manifold is doing what it does, I think, because of runner length. Painting the engine after I cleaned her this morning, kind of cool. Did a matte finish under and almost like a bass boat sparkle. Nice. Did you do like metal flake? That's old school stuff. The record in the 8th is 575. I'm trying to go 550s. The record for what? For what is this micro record that you're looking at? What are the specifications for it? And if you're doing a micro record, you can use whatever you want, because then you just put the little caveat at it. Graduating kids have high value cars over there. I don't know what you mean by high value cars. There was just a bunch of cars of them getting together. If a stock 4.8 with a stage 4 BTR cam, would a torque storm supercharger be a problem? No. That's a lot of camshaft for a 4.8. In fact, it would almost be better with a supercharger on it. Well, it would definitely be better with a supercharger on it because everything's better with boost. But having that kind of camshaft and running RPM, which is what's going to help a centrifugal supercharger make more power, is RPM. So it would be beneficial. Light metal flake on a black matte background. Okay, cool. Getaway, what's going on? Yeah, the impression might be a car show, so I assumed it would be. It just was all of the cars parked in rows and stuff, so like you would do for a car show. They could have been all stock cars or trucks or whatever. Did you see Iron Trap Garage just got a blown Arden put together and running? Oh, that's cool. Fastest street-driven Crown Vic. Hasn't Cletus run something in a Crown Vic that's gone really fast? What does Cameron's Crown Vic run? He's Matt's buddy. This intake was Chevy's clandestine research of the Gen 2 LT1. Yeah. So the answer to the question, the answer to the poll question, let's see here. Would the dual throttle body upper make more peak torque than the stock HO upper? The answer to that is no, it does not. It makes less peak torque. It does make more peak power, but makes less peak torque. And for those guys that are interested, the interesting thing is, let's see here, I'll get rid of that. Crossover point was 4,400 RPM, which is where the dual throttle body started making more power. And we're able to run this because we're running it with a Holley, which just runs off a map sensor, basically. John was telling me back when they made this, back in the late 80s or 1990, real early 1990. He said the drivability was terrible, which is not surprising given the amount of throttle blade, and also trying to run this with any of the factory ECUs, which is what I think that they were trying to do. I don't remember if it was a speed density one or if it was a mass air one. If it's a mass air one, I don't know how they connected this. I'll have to get more information and see what they tried to run that with. He said it was not good for driving around. Come up to Modesto, the American Graffiti Car Show today. Tons of beautiful cars. I bet there's a lot of cool stuff. 10 years ago, Cameron went 996. Yeah, I thought that Cameron's turbo deal was pretty fast. Yeah, Cletus is doing the Crown Vics what the Dukes of Hazzard did to all those Dodges. Marshall, the LS3 heads, or the AFR LS3 heads, are Mongoose heads. They're brand new. They're in the box. I bought them from Summit Racing, and their Summit sells them for a little over $3,000. $2,500 would be what I'd be asking for them. Went to go check. 566 is his best, 8th from a month ago. Okay. Do curve runners make more torque than straight runners? No, not necessarily. The torque that you make is going to be a function of the length and the cross section. Actually, a bend in the runner, people are going to argue that it changes the flow rate, which it can a little bit. But if you have a runner that flows 300 CFM and the cylinder is only using 200 of it, that doesn't matter. Or 250 or 275, that doesn't really matter. What does matter is the length, whether it's straight or curved. The length dictates the amount of time that it takes for this pressure wave to go up and back, to travel up and back that runner length. And when it comes back as a positive pressure wave, and that's how you get additional cylinder filling. And the time that it takes determines when it arrives, and the RPM range dictates how quickly it has to go. Well, it goes the same distance and takes the same amount of time every trip, but the piston's going to be in a different position, and so it's going to arrive at the wrong time to add cylinder filling. That's why runner length is a critical element in tuning when you make the or the change that you're making to the power curve. No one has reset the world's fastest Crown Vic record yet, not even Cletus. So Tim just said Cameron went 566. So if you want to go fast, and Cameron did it with an LS. Lake Worth, Florida. Andy, Richard, my girlfriend just bought a National Metropolitan. Very awesome. I'm debating stock motor or some reasonable swap. No crazy V8s. Like a 1.8, a Pinto or something. The engine that I want to put in one, and what year is it? And is it a convertible? I want to put a 4AG, a Toyota twin cam in it, just because I like the way that they look. But any of those motors would be good. Because any of those motors, you don't need, I wouldn't put something in that makes a ton of power because you don't need it. You don't really want to go fast in that car. But put something in there that looks cool. And that's why I like that twin cam Toyota. But an SVO turbo or any of those, again, not that you need to use that. 58, not convertible. I like all of the Metros. I think that I really like those cars. I think that they're cool. Donald, what's your deal? I hate to be that guy, but put a Crown Vic body on a Tesla Plaid. Yeah, what's a Tesla Plaid running the 8th? I didn't even know what it would have to be really good, because that's usually where they win the race. If you see them staging up against somebody, especially any kind of, any kind of reasonable performance car, any gas powered performance car, it's hard to beat them. And it's because they get such a good launch. I don't know what the eighth is. If anybody knows what the 8th mile is on the Tesla Plaid, let me know. Yeah, we're at we're about 50-50. Would the dual throttle body upper intake more peak torque than a stock HO upper? 54% saying yes. It did not, by the way. It made peak torque for that one was 304 foot-pounds, and for the HO upper, 317. This was down like 13 foot-pounds or so. Not a ton, but some. And that HO upper intake manifold, that's a really long runner. It's a very long, small runner. I think what they were trying to do is let's get the intake manifold to flow less than those heads. How are we going to be able to do that? Because the E7T heads are not great. And I think, I don't want to upset any Hypo 289 guys, but I don't think a Hypo 289 head is any better than a 5-liter Ford head. I think that none of them are great. And I'm an ex Hypo 289 owner. I had a 65 notch, 4-speed, 4 series gear, 411s, I think. I think they were 410s. I think they're 411s. Pony interior, it was nice. It was all restored and stuff. It was a good car. But still, it's a 289. High RPM stuff. It needed more cylinder head. It had enough camshaft, and the dual plane intake manifold's fine. That would make power, but it needed cylinder head. I think that when we ran the Boss 302, I think a Boss 302 made, I don't know, 80 or 90 more horsepower than a 289. When fabricating, besides a welder, what other tools are you recommended? What are you trying to fabricate? So the thing that you're going to fabricate is going to dictate the thing that the kind of tools that you need. Are you fabricating something that needs a mill or a lathe or just a chop saw and a grinder and a drill press? I get by with a lot of stuff at West Tech, but a real machine shop like ACCUFAB has, they can basically do anything. With your Hypo solid cam, did it take a lot of work? It was a solid cam. It was a factory solid flat tapping cam. It was the original Hypo camshaft in it. It didn't take a lot of lash adjusting, mostly because I didn't drive it a whole bunch. And honestly, once you set that, unless you wear something or one of those things backs off, it shouldn't come out of adjustment. R 190 heads have a good piston to valve clearance in stock 350 HO block. Yeah, the piston to valve clearance for those heads would be dictated by the camshaft. I don't know if an 11R head, does that have the same valve location and angle as a twisted wedge head? Because a twisted wedge head has increased valve clearance. You can get away with more camshaft on those because of the valve position and angle. Those 11R heads are good. If you have a 302, I don't know that you need a 190 head. A 170 head would also work. The advisor makes big power with the Hypo 289 head over 500 horsepower. He doesn't do that with a stock head. Tesla Plaid claimed 1/8 is a 550, between 550 and 6 seconds. Okay. That's pretty good. Has anybody run a Tesla Plaid on slicks, or does it even need that? Would it allow the traction control to put more power down? And they're running LS heads on Fords. You can on the 300 inline 6-cylinder Ford. Open the throttle blades on any modern sport bike, and you see the back of the valves. This seems to be the best design for flow. I don't know what you're talking about. Just because you can see the valve doesn't mean that that's the best intake design for flow. I can mess the flow rate up of the intake manifold and still see the valve. The intake design still has to be good. But sport bikes do have a really high specific output. They run a lot of RPM to do that. What about the stock truck 5-liter intake? It came from the factory with a dual throttle inlet. Edelbrock made a large. I don't know what your question is about it. It does work. I honestly think that if you, and I'd like to do this test, I'm thinking that if you took a stock HO upper and lower from a Mustang and put the truck upper and lower on, it wouldn't surprise me if the truck manifold made more power. Here comes all the people defending 289 heads. Yes, you can modify 289 heads and make them better. In fact, the guys that there are a couple of guys that come into West Tech that make that do vintage racing motors, that build motors for vintage racing applications. That they do a lot of 289s, and they make a lot of power with them, and they have to look like 289 heads. They're not factory 289 heads anymore, though. Because if you got something that flows 150 or 160 CFM, that's not going to make a lot of power. The big difference between the hypo heads and the mid-60 GT40 heads, or the Gurney Westlake heads, or any of the specialty heads that they would have made. I saw down an Indy motor intake and I could see the valve line of sight seems to be the best design. Like I said, that's not a universal statement. The taper could be wrong, cross section could be wrong, the length could be wrong, the the shape of the inner wall could be wrong. All of that stuff can still be wrong, and you can still see the valve. And on some applications where you can make the manifold like that, the packaging is important. So if you have the packaging to make that so that you could, and you have to design the head port also to accept that. Are you familiar with UPR Fox bike suspension parts, or is there better for the same amount of money? I don't know. It's been so long since I did any 5-liter suspension stuff. It's been a long time since I did any of that. The Maximum Motorsports does really good stuff. What cam would you recommend as an upgrade for a stock L98 to improve the torque at all RPM for a truck cam. We've run some small ones that are like 206, 212 would probably be better everywhere than a stock cam. Even something maybe a 212, 218 kind of thing. So you take a look at the Pure Energy 246 cam test that I did. We did that versus a stock truck cam. I don't know how much different that cam is than the TunePort cam, but we've done some cam tests on TunePort stuff. It's just going to be small. Under 500 horsepower, TFS heads, 1-inch spacer, special tune on stock. So you have a stock mass air meter. If you're trying to make 500 horsepower from a stock mass air meter, it's going to be restrictive. And it should be topping out the meter. You should be at 5 volts on that meter way before 500 horsepower. You know what makes torque? A GT3582 on a 5.3? Yeah, that should be pretty sporty. Guys, remember Shelby ditched the 289 for the 427? Yeah, I think that the Daytona stuff and the racing 289s, I want to say that those are probably in the low to mid 400s when they were racing them. And like I said, they were pretty modified. And then putting a bigger motor like they did in the GT40 stuff when they were running the FE motors, they made it a lot. And not just a lot more peak power, because that's what people are talking about. But if you're the guy driving the car and you're road racing, you're constantly accelerating through the gears and through the RPM range. And so lots of average power, which if you compare a 289, which would be a high strung, especially a high horsepower 289, it'd be a high strung, high RPM kind of thing. But a 500 or 550 horsepower 427 FE motor, I would have a gobs more torque. And so it would accelerate more than just what the peak number is telling you. KM, you want to put a blower on a 454? And you want to put a gear vendors on it? A gear vendors is a good idea. Adding more gear to it is always good. Lower cruise engine speed will definitely help fuel mileage. And gear vendors are good. They're not cheap, but that's a good piece of hardware, though. There goes my light flickering. It's trying to survive. I think I'm gonna have to replace that whole can. I think that's got problems. Without sacrificing too much, yeah, GT40, GT3582 wouldn't. It's not going to sacrifice power on top, not compared to any. Is the 355 an ideal gear set for a street-driven turbo small block Ford with a turbo 400? I wouldn't have that much gear in it if you're driving it around. I would rather put like a 308 in it, so it would have gearing for the freeway also. Or if you're doing any freeway driving in it, or is it just in town? I don't think it needs a 355 gear with a turbo 400. Not with a turbo motor. I think you're going to have traction problems. I think you'll be fighting putting power down, and so that tells you that you could get away with more gear. Plus, you got to do that, high-speed roll racing. So you got to have the gearing for that. Would GT 3582 also be responsive with a mild cam 4.8? Yeah, a single one would be. I would argue that turbo is too small for the comment above on the 5.3, but it would be responsive. It'd be a better choice on a 4.8, I think, because that's probably a 500 to 600 horsepower turbo. It's already in there. Well, that's a different choice. Whether or not I think that it's optimum or it's the one that I would choose isn't absolute. If it's already in there, then I would definitely pick it. You know, it's just like if you have a 4.8 in your truck, would I upgrade to a 5.3? Yeah, 5.3 will make more torque and it'll make more average power than a 4.8. But if you already have the 4.8 in there, then just make that one better. Nice. I have a broken 6.0 and think about replacing with a spare 4.8 and boost. Yeah, 4.8 with a GT35 would be plenty torquey, and it would get better fuel mileage. Richard, did the original 60s GT40 heads become the 69 to 7351 Windsor 4-barrel heads? I've never seen anything on the internet, or I've never spoken to anybody that told me that that's the case. I think that the GT40 heads were specialized, and even a 69 to 70 351 head was about the equivalent of a modern GT40 head, not a 60s GT40 head, but like the Explorer GT40 head or the Ford Racing GT40 head, which is maybe 30 horsepower or so better than a stock head. So it's not great. And in fact, I don't think that a 351 head is as good as a GT40 head. I'd like to see that comparison because I've never done that, but I don't think that it is. I run 390 gears in my LS2. Yeah, that's a different engine combination though. GT3582, definitely small for a 5.3, but it will support 10 PSI and make it an incredible daily. Would it do? Let's see here. Let me do some math here. Yeah, it would on a stock one. I don't think it's going to support 10 pounds on a cammed 5.3 though. At least not at the power peak. Any big plans for the summer? Yeah, more metro testing, more cam testing. And I have a 400 that I want to run, and then Pontiac testing. GTX Hemi 4-speed 354 gears or 411s. Well, again, the gear ratio is all going to depend on what you do with it. I wouldn't put 4 series. I had 4 series gears in my 65 Hypo Mustang, and obviously it was terrible for driving on the freeway. I can't imagine people having 456s or 513s or something in there, but you know, you'd usually have a little bit taller tire, and you probably wouldn't be doing lots of long distance traveling with that kind of combination. It helps if this is a drag race car and you want quarter-mile action, or you're just driving it around the street and you know you want people to hear the motor and stuff. Then that's all okay. Again, it's dictated by what the ultimate use is going to be. Just waving to myself. How do AFR 195 LT1 CNC heads compare to well-ported stock heads? Would they make more power on a street engine? I don't know. I think that would be a better question for Jim at TPIS. I've never seen that comparison because I've never seen a properly ported set of LT1 heads in comparison to an airflow research head. I think would be really hard to beat. I would suspect that it would be better. I just don't know how much better it is and whether it would be worth it if you already have if I'm choosing between buying airflow research heads and buying ported stock heads, I'd buy the airflow research heads. If I already have the ported stock heads, I don't think that I would upgrade to an airflow research head, because I don't know about how much difference that would be, and whether or not, if there is a difference, if it's 10 horsepower, if it's 20 horsepower, is that amount different enough to justify the cost? And then what is the combination? Are you taking advantage of everything that a ported LT1 has to offer? I'm certain that and we're going to be doing this test, I'm certain that a properly ported set of LT1 heads is going to go like 260 or 270. And so that means you could make mid 500 horsepower with it. And so are you doing that? If you're not taking advantage of everything that the head has already, you don't need to get more cylinder head. There's less interference to flow if the runner is straight. Okay, I know you want it to be a line of sight thing, and I know that the line of sight guys want that to be a thing, but I'm telling you that all of the other things that have to do with runner design are important. Will depend on my $100 LQ4. No milkshake, bearings looks great. Replace the pickup tube, balls in there, good. I run about 2,300 RPM at 70. Oh, so that's an overdriven transmission. That's good. I wish I had a T56, but it's a 4L65. Where do you see 4.3 liter tuning with prospective aftermarket parts? We can run a 4.3 with a standalone management system like a Holly or whatever without any problem. So the tuning part of it is not hard, particularly if we're running a some sort of throttle body injected thing, or some manifold that has a, like a tunnel ram style manifold with port injection in it. Most probably a fabricated one. I think guys have already done that. So it needs good cylinder heads, but 350 NA, I certainly think that would be possible with good ported heads and the right camshaft and a tunnel ram style manifold. When you raced your Mustang, did you start out with the original block? That's all it ever had in it, was the original block, the whole time it was run. It had the original block, the original crank, the original rods. At some point, I would need to go back and look and see when this happened. We put pistons in it. We put Wiseco forged pistons in it. They were lower compression than stock. Was looking at some screenshots the other day when you could get a Bear Dart SHP 351 for under $2,000. Yeah, that's nice. I have a 383 LT1 short block at the machine shop. I'm trying to decide between AFR or getting stock LT1 heads ported. Well, you just need to look at an AFR head. I think is going to be better. I feel pretty confident the AFR head is going to be better. That's not the question. The question now is it better enough to justify the cost? I don't know what it's going to cost to get you the heads ported. I think that Jim at TPIS, I want to say his are 12 or 1,300. So I don't know what the airflow research heads are going to cost. And depending on what you're trying to do with the rest of the combination, if you're trying to make 400 horsepower or 450 horsepower or whatever, and you're putting ported heads on it, then I would just get the other ones. If you're trying to max it out to go racing, then you should step up to the best head that you can put on there. 305 HO heads on a 350, is it worth it? I don't. Are you trying to just get more compression? You could just mill the 350 heads. Dart blocks are heavier than Ford racing blocks. Okay. I'm asking because I want to put together something with spare good parts. I have an original complete 85 GT motor combination. I'd like to figure out if I can put twisted wedge heads on it. Well, you just put them on there and mock it up and measure it. I mean, that's the best way. Asking somebody if something fits is not nearly as good as you actually doing the measurement on it. An 85, I don't think has forged pistons in it. That's one of the nice things about my motor. Being an 88, it had factory forged pistons in it, even before we replaced them with the Wiseco's. And again, that's back in when we did lower compression because we were running boost on it. And in my defense, I shouldn't have done that. But in my defense, I was running the Silver State, so I wasn't just running boost on it. I was running boost on it at wide open throttle for 42 minutes, which most people don't do. Oh, if you're just doing a driver, then yeah, you're gonna have more than enough piston to valve clearance. I wouldn't put anything big in it. Just put a letter cam in it or something. Tots and bacon? Are you having lunch? Is it lunchtime already? The Silver State was a lot of fun. Man, we had a blast out there. And just like any kind of racing, the race itself was fun, but all the work beforehand, before the race, the car show, and having dinner and having drinks and then the stuff afterwards, the awards banquet and all that stuff, all of that was great too. And in fact, probably more so than the race itself. What's the longest time-wise nitro shot on a stock engine? I think you probably would talk to the Bonneville guys. They probably have done it the most. Certainly for several miles. Oh, it's brunch? Yeah, it's brunch time, right? And the nitrous, as long as the tune is correct, and you're not trying to run a 500 shot with it, you can have it on there for quite a while. Like to build a Boss 351 block 427 motor. What else would I need? A donor car. What are Russia heads? I don't know what that is. Oh, Aussie. Okay. I thought that there was some kind of new block from Russia. I thought, oh, that's cool. Kremlin heads, yep. And what I hope is that they're made out of titanium, from old MiG 21s or something. Because they got all the spare titanium. Where do you think all the titanium came from for the SR-71? When testing for Silver State, did you use Mrs. Orchid's Highway? I've never been there actually. I know that guys were doing that. Some of the magazine guys, some of the bigger magazines were doing that. The Motor Trends and Car and Driver, and those guys were doing that stuff. But I've actually never been there. We had a place called Area 52 out in Nevada that we used for testing. What's up with the rich guys using titanium hardware on their Fox body to save weight? Yeah, what are they making out of titanium? But retainers? I don't know if that's going to save a lot of weight. And I don't think you'd want to do a roll cage out of titanium, right? Did you trailer the Mustang to Area 52? No. We didn't trailer the Mustang to the Silver State. So if it can't drive out there and make passes, then it can't drive out there and go to the Silver State. When I had the Mustang, there was no trailering ever. We didn't know what a trailer was. We didn't have anything to pull the trailer with because the Mustang was the only car that I had. It was the only car that I owned. So we did all that stuff and drove out and raced and drove back. Caleb, I don't think I would put twisted wedge heads on there with a stock cam. I mean, I think it'll help. It'll help compared to a stock one, just not very much. I remember, I think Tom Wilson did a test with an airflow research head on a stock cammed one, and I don't think it added very much power. What tools and extra parts? I didn't carry any extra spare parts, no water pumps or anything like that. And we did have a rudimentary toolkit, you know, vice grips and maybe some sockets and stuff. But the problem is that we couldn't carry too much because we had to carry all of that stuff with us during the race. We did. Well, I take that back. We did have one chase car because Jimmy's wife Kelly, who is fantastic in every different way, she's great. But they usually brought another car, and so that we could stick stuff in there like our spare tire and all that stuff during the race. Was it the lake bed? No, we never ran on a lake bed. My motor did have a stock water pump on it, which is why it would, when I ran the motor, when it was basically stock with just open exhaust, that car would go 146, 147 miles an hour. And it would do almost the same speed in fourth gear as it would in fifth gear. It had a 308 gear, but it would run at like 4,100 RPM or so in fifth gear. But if we shifted into sixth gear, it would run up near 6,000. But what would happen is the car would start to heat up because it was cavitating the stock water pump. So slowing the water pump down would have been a good idea if we wanted to run lots of engine speed. It would have been a much better idea. But having the car run in fifth gear and down at 4,000 or between 4,000 and 4,500 RPM was a much better deal. Once we put the blower and stuff on there and we were making more power, then we were running more RPM in fifth gear. But we still weren't running enough RPM where we had a problem because we weren't running anywhere near 6,000 RPM, not with a 308 gear in it. That'd have been really fast. And so, you know, you just don't want to overspeed the water pump. But we never had issues with that thing running hot. And for most of the races, we had the stock radiator in there. I think we eventually upgraded to a 3-core or a 3-row or a 4-row radiator. I don't know what the lake bed is near Edwards. I know that I've been out to El Mirage, to the dry lake bed, and set records out there. Carcraft did top speed testing of 96 Corvette. Yeah, Caleb, you could just go get an Explorer motor from the wrecking yard. Unless you want to run a carburetor. But even if you want to run a carburetor, just go buy the long block. Because then it already has GT40 heads on it. And that's already, you know, a good bit better than an 85 head. 2 more minutes. We'll close out our poll at 53 and 47. 53% saying that weird looking dual throttle body ACCUFAB piece. When are you running the 3-cylinder Metro? I won't run this Metro at El Mirage or at Bonneville, but we will run another one. Richard, my 86 5-liter had factory forged pistons. I don't remember when that started. '85 and then 87 to 92. So it says 86 didn't. Let's see. 89 to 92 were forged. So I'm getting different information on those. Forged piston started in 85 and went until mid-year 92. I'm pretty sure the 85 had a roller cam. So maybe all of those 5 liters did. That's good. Speaking of ACCUFAB, didn't they merge with Kennyville? Yeah, ACCUFAB bought Kennyville. Your Mustang Extreme Energy 270 you were over 300 foot-pounds at how low of an RPM until 3,000? I don't know. I need to go back and look at the. I need to go back and look at the data. 300 foot-pounds at the tire. I don't know how much chassis dyno data I have on that. Nate, you're running 85 through the Holly on your Metro, still tuning, solve the issue even without intercooler. What was the Nate? I'm looking at your thing. You use different pistons. What Holly are you running on it? Target wide open throttle, air fuel in a boat, 12.5. Is it safe? I think I would make it richer than that for extended running in a boat. So you want a carb, okay? But even like I said, even if you went and got the long block, it would have GT40 heads on it. You could put a dual plane RPM air gap or the Speedmaster version of that or any of those, and then put a 650 on it and you'd be on your way. You'd be good to go. So Nate, what is your combination on the Metro? I'm curious. Let's see here. Okay. And on that note, it is time to go. Thank you guys all for showing up. I will see you guys tonight. And today I'm getting the video up comparing the dual plane intake manifold to the factory LT1 intake manifold on the LT1. I'll see you guys all later. Late.